allowed,
To give permission for someone do something or for something to happen. For example, cameras were not allowed in the courtroom.
allowed,
Not silently or in a whisper. For example, he read the poem aloud to the class.
ant,
A small insect typically having a sting and living in complex social colonies. For example, the ant carried a crumb back to its nest.
ant,
The sister of one's father or mother or the wife of one's uncle. For example, I visited my aunt over the holidays.
bald,
Having a scalp wholly or partly lacking hair. For example, he was completely bald by the age of 30.
bald,
To have cried or wailed loudly. For example, the baby bawled for hours.
band,
A flat, thin strip or loop of material put around something, typically to hold it together or to decorate it. For example, she wore a band on her wedding ring finger.
band,
To have officially or legally prohibited. For example, smoking is banned in most restaurants.
there,
Not clothed or covered. For example, he walked barefoot on the hot sand.
there,
A large, heavy mammal with thick fur and a very short tail. For example, bear hibernates during the winter.
bean,
Edible seed that grows in pots and leguminous plants. For example, I love edamame bean.
bin,
Past tense form of be. For example, I have been to that restaurant before.
berry,
Small pulpy fruit. For example, she picked fresh berries from the garden.
berry,
Put or hide underground. For example, I had to bury the waste in the backyard.
blue,
A color intermediate between green and violet, as of the sky or sea on a sunny day. For example, the sky was a clear, bright blue.
blue,
To have produced an air current. For example, the wind blew fiercely this afternoon.
bread,
Type of food. For example, our local bakery sells the best wholemeal bread for miles.
bread,
To raise or develop animal stock. For example, in the past, many farmers bred rabbits for meat and fur.
bridal,
Concerning a bride or a wedding. For example, she went shopping for her bridal gown.
bridle,
A set of straps that are placed over a horse's head so that the rider can control the horse. For example, he was leading a horse by the bridle.
buy,
To acquire an exchange for payment, to make a purchase. For example, I need to buy groceries for the week.
my,
Identifying the agent performing an action next to and beside. For example, the book was written by a famous author.
capital,
The city or town that functions as the seat of government and administrative center of a country or region. For example, London is the capital of the United Kingdom.
capital,
a building in which a state legislative body meets, specifically, the building in which the U.S. Congress meets in Washington, D.C. For example, the Capitol is an iconic building. In the United States,
cereal,
grain used for food, type of dried breakfast eaten with milk. For example, my favorite breakfast is cereal in the morning.
cereal,
A story or program delivered in installments, taking place in series. For example, the serial killer loved watching serial on TV.
chili,
Small spicy pepper or pod used in cooking. For example, I had pasta in a rich chili sauce.
chili,
A bit cold, not warm. For example, the morning air was chilly.
cite,
To quote as evidence for an argument or statement, or to mention as an example or proof. For example, Brian cited several studies in his report.
sight,
The faculty or power of seeing, the visual perception of an object. For example, I toured the sights of Paris.
coarse,
Rough or loose in texture or grain, not smooth or fine. For example, he has a shirt made of coarse fabric.
course,
The route or direction followed by a ship, aircraft, road, or river, a series of lectures or lessons in a particular subject. For example, she plays golf at the course.
current,
Type of berry, also of dried berry variety. For example, we have lots of currant bushes at the bottom of our garden.
current,
Strong flow of water, present or up to date. For example, surfers should be aware of the strong currents along the south coast of England.
deer,
Large animal with antlers similar to a small elk or moose. For example, some UK farmers keep deer and breed them for their meat.
deer,
Beloved person, expensive. For example, dear, the wedding ring you've chosen is a bit too dear.
die,
To cease living, to become dead. For example, the old tree finally died.
dye,
To add color to or change the color of something using dye. For example, she decided to dye her hair red.
doe,
A female deer. For example, the doe grazed quietly in the meadow.
dough,
A thick, malleable mixture of flour and liquid, used for baking into bread or pastry. For example, she rolled out the dough to make a pie crust.
done,
Completed, finished. For example, the project is finally done.
done,
To make persistent demands upon for payment. For example, the landlord dunned Mike for the overdue rent.
earn,
To receive money as payment for work that one has done. For example, she works hard to earn a living.
earn,
A tall, rounded vase with a stem and base, especially one used for storing the ashes of a cremated person. For example, the family placed the urn, containing their grandfather's ashes on the mantel.
ewe,
A female sheep. For example, the ewe grazed in the field.
you,
The person or people that the speaker is addressing. For example, are you going to the store today?
Fir.
An evergreen coniferous tree with upright cones and flat needle-shaped leaves. For example, the forest was populated with tall fir trees.
Fur.
The short, fine, soft hair of certain animals. For example, the cat's fur was silky and smooth.
Flea.
A small wingless jumping insect that feeds on the blood of mammals and birds. For example, the dog must be bathed frequently so. That would be no fleas.
Flee.
To run away from a place or situation of danger. For example, to escape the fire, he had to flee his apartment.
Flour.
Ingredient used to make bread and cakes. For example, this cake contains flour, milk, and eggs.
Flower.
Seed-bearing part of a plant. For example, her husband gave her a nice bunch of flowers on her birthday.
Flew.
To have moved through the air using wings. For example, the birds flew south for the winter.
Flu.
A common infectious viral illness spread by coughs and sneezes. For example, she caught the flu and had to stay in bed for a week.
4.
The number after 3 and before 5. For example, she has for Halloween candies.
4.
If someone receives something, if something is done for a reason. For example, I bought my nephew a bucket of candy for his birthday.
8.
The number after 7 and before 9. For example, he cut the pizza into 8 equal pieces.
8.
To have taken food into the body through the mouth. For example, he ate breakfast before leaving for school.
Gourd.
To have pierced or stabbed with a horn or tusk. For example, the matador was gored by the bull during the fight.
Gourd.
A fleshy, typically large fruit with a hard skin, some varieties of which are edible. For example, they grew pumpkins and other gourds in their garden.
Grate.
Shred into small pieces using a food grater. For example, the recipe says we need to grate the cheese into the sauce.
Great.
Large, prominent, very good. For example, white shark is a great hunter.
Heel.
The back part of the foot below the ankle. For example, she doesn't wear her black high heels anymore.
Heel.
To become healthy or sound again. For example, his hand was broken and it took a long time to heal.
Hole.
An opening through a solid body or surface. For example, he dug a hole in the ground to plant the tree.
Whole.
All of, entire. For example, she spent the whole day reading her new book.
R.
A period of time equal to 60 minutes. For example, the meeting lasted an hour longer than expected.
R.
A possessive pronoun used to indicate belonging to or associated with the speaker and one or more other people. For example, our house is at the end of the street.
I.
The organ of sight. For example, she has beautiful blue eyes.
I.
The first person singular subject pronoun, used to refer to oneself. For example, I am going to the seafood market.
idle,
Not active or in use, without purpose or effect, pointless. For example, the car sat idle in the driveway.
idle,
A person who is greatly admired, loved, or revered, or an image used as an object of worship. For example, many teenagers regard pop stars as their idols.
need,
To work dough or clay into a uniform mixture by pressing, folding, and stretching. For example, they spent the morning kneading the dough for bread.
need,
To requiring something because it is essential or very important. For example, I need to buy new shoes for the trip.